bonjour mes amis, bienvenue .NET API Review. Today we have 4 issues. Let's see if we can burn through them all. First up, in a window that needs to be bigger, the new time span from milliseconds overload breaks system link expressions. 109833. Sounds like a bug report. How are we API reviewing it?
Yeah. In .NET 9, we have exposed some overloads for time span from milliseconds. Not from milliseconds, I mean from different units. And one of them we exposed is time span dot from milliseconds, which is taking long, and the second optional parameter, which is microseconds. And unfortunately, this is broke the link expression, because link expression doesn't work with the optional parameters. So it pick this one and see that it's optional parameter, so it produce a compilation error. Also, I want to say about like in .NET 8, this was working because we have another overload that it takes double. So it was working with double before, and after we expose this from milliseconds, which is take 2 parameters and second is optional, it started breaking the link expression. So the proposal here is I am suggesting to expose the overload that takes 1 parameter and changes the second one, which is taking the second one as optional parameter, make it non-optional.
How does that fix link expressions? Won't it still conflict between the long and the double overload?
No, actually, it's picking because like if you pass something like it's not really double, I mean like not annotated with like F or D or whatever, it picks the long overloads, and at that time it will pick the one which has just one parameter, which is long milliseconds. So I don't think it's confusion between double and long. It's more about like it pick one of the overloads and it won't make sure that it's not optional. It doesn't use any optional parameters there.
So I don't know how to think about that. Basically, what it means is whenever we have methods that have no overloads without optionals, you can never use it in link expressions effectively, right?
Yeah. If you see, I pasted the error message that it's up. If you yeah, you see the highlighted error message CS 0854. Yeah, this was news for me too. I mean, like I didn't know that this is the case.
So, but I assume we don't care.
Yeah, I kind of
that the reason we care,
just take common 0, right? Yeah.
Yeah, that the reason we care is because this decided to call this one instead of the double one.
That's right, exactly.
Is that even right with overload resolution?
I don't think it's matching normal overload resolution.
Okay, because I think the correct number of arguments is supposed to win, so that should just go implicitly to a double, which should have been a different reason that we didn't.
Well, I think the way this works is that I think when expressions were built, there was at a time when C# didn't support optionals. So effectively, the overload resolution algorithm treats them as required parameters. So that means if you only have one argument, the other one doesn't even enter the consideration. Therefore, the double one wins.
I just tested it without a link expression, and the long overload is winning.
Yeah, because C#
it's an exact match.
Yeah, but that requires whoever does the overload resolution to understand optionals and then not discard them due to error key, right? Which is what the previous algorithm clearly did. Yeah, I kind of am with Jeremy on this one. Like, I don't want to set the precedence that we do this because then effectively we're saying now we give up on optionals. Like, I mean, it makes sense in areas that have a super high chance of being used in expression trees, but like, I don't know, time spent for milliseconds is just a random API. Like by that logic, anything could be used inside of an expression tree, right? So I don't think that makes the bar.
But my point here is this is a breaking change.
Right.
Because
So,
like
but we
It's
already
a
broke it.
code,
breaking change for reflection, notably.
So what was the reflection point?
Well, so the reason this breaks in essence is both because link expressions doesn't match the normal overload resolution algorithm that C# has, and in part that's also because adding new overloads breaks reflection scenarios, and link is functionally working over all of this via reflection. So like this is one of the many cases where just adding a new overload can break reflection in trivial ways, either because the conversions that the runtime tries to do by default don't match up, or because now there's more entries when you were expecting just a single entry or a limited number of entries to be returned for a method group.
Yeah, I might feel better about this if this was something we could fix in the patch, right? But we're fixing this at 10 at the earliest, I assume, because it's an API change. So, like, I don't know. That, given that 9 has to break anyway at this point, might as well.
I guess what I'm
live with
missing is, so is the argument that it break between different builds of .NET 9, or is the argument that it broke between 8 and 9?
Between 8 and 9, right?
8 and 9, yes.
So why did it work in 8?
Because it has the
okay.
double, I mean, it has the overloads that take double, and link expression picked this one at that time because we didn't have the one which is taking long.
Yeah, the way you were describing it earlier, emo, didn't exactly make sense because there still is an overload it could use. It's like kind of to quickly pick the one with optional arguments, even though it doesn't support it. But yeah.
Right.
Missing what is happening here.
So, existing code from 8 that was using link expressions, calling time span from milliseconds, was hitting the one that takes a double.
Yes.
We added a new overload that link expressions prefers, except it prefers it to then say that it can't use it.
That's right.
Well, the compiler in general just prefers it because the first argument, the long argument, is an exact match.
Well, it's not an exact here. There's an implicit conversion that ends up being better due to being a built-in type.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I agree with Stefan. Like, I think my explanation didn't make sense. I guess what they're doing in expression trees is they kind of run the normal over resolution rule that the compiler has, and then they're effectively saying, well, now in order to actually call this one, I need a language feature that expression trees doesn't support, aka binding to optional arguments or optional parameters. And I think that's probably what's happening.
Right, which is probably the safer behavior for link expressions if it's not going to support optional arguments. It should just pick overload.
Well, it's certainly
the normal
better than
compiler.
having two different
Yeah.
algorithms where if you copy paste code, it still compiles, but it means something very different.
Right.
So I would agree with that. But I guess to the earlier point, it's like, yeah, it's a breaking change, but I'm not sure I would say it's the same as reflection. I would say to me it's the same bucket as any other source breaking change because it's a source breaking change you can't recompile. I think the question is now, well, what are we doing in other places where that happens? And I think the bar we generally apply is, well, is this an esoteric example or is this something that many people are running into? And if many people are running into, sure, we do a tweak because, yeah, we would like to avoid breaking changes like that, right? But just saying because it's broken, therefore we fix it, I don't think is the bar we apply even to source breaking changes. And this will be in the realm of like, is this very common or is this just one guy running into that?
Okay, so for this specific from milliseconds, I expect many people is going to call it, but I'm not sure about if they are calling for with a link expression or not. And also, I want to say that this is reported by external user. I mean, it's not us, and reported right after we released .NET 9. I mean, so it was like a couple of days after the release we got this.
No, I
So-
believe that. I mean, if you have the code base, when you recompile, you run into it. But I'm not sure that tells me that it's a lot of people though.
We're not going to patch this in .NET 9 though. Like the soonest this fix would go out will be .NET 10.
Yeah.
Exactly.
No, I get it, but like it's still to me it's the question of like what precedents are we setting? Like are we doing this for all those kinds of changes? Because I think we have enough users that you will always find someone that has a problem like that. Like that's
Clearly,
kind of,
we need to do 9.1. We're ready right now. But yeah, I would
Notably,
say
security. Steph needs to be escorted
Notably,
off the
this wouldn't
premises.
be the only fix either, because there's also the same issue would exist on time span from days, from hours, from microseconds, from minutes, from seconds.
Yeah. I honestly think maybe what we should do instead is like, I mean, we keep saying that maybe we should probably have a conversation with the compiler guys again and say like, what is are we really saying we never add any features to expression trees?
Well, if you wait 40 minutes, he'll be in this room.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah,
so
I
the problem
imagine
with
the
expression
way-
trees is they are effectively the backbone that makes EF work, right? And so like I recently started playing with EF, and it's already painful because a lot of the standard operators you can't use, conditional, null you can't use null bang, right? So there's a lot of things that seem like they should work, but they don't. And so I don't know, like because if we could make changes to expression trees, I think what we would do instead is just have it work, right? Like that would be the more reasonable fix.
Yeah, I wonder if the reason that they didn't support it is because they're concerned that constant value might change.
No, I think it's just the problem of touching expression trees. So they would, I think what they would do is with support in expression trees is, I mean, they could do what you suggest, which is just pretend it's a literal, right?
Yeah.
Put it in there. But I think the general problem that they have in general is that they, in order to represent some of the language constructs, they would have to add nodes to expression trees. And the problem is once you change the nodes, well, that's a behavior breaking change, right? So now how do query providers
So
harden themselves for new nodes showing up
I
at
would
random
resist,
times?
but I wonder why they didn't do it.
I honestly think it's because it's just originally wasn't there, so it's a change. But I would agree with you that seems like a reasonable targetable fix that would not break expression tree providers.
okay, regardless of link expression, I mean, like the APIs that we exposed, I mean, the other overloads, we exposing overloads that takes one parameter, like what we are proposing here. So why we didn't do it from milliseconds? So like, for example, I mean, from minutes, from day, from seconds or whatever, we already exposed an overload that takes one parameter like this.
Because the rule is once you have 2 or more default parameters, make a simpler version that has no default parameters. This one only had 1.
Oh, it's because of the number of them? No, but I mean, like if you take, for example, from seconds, there's 3 overloads. There's one that takes 1 double, there's one that takes 1 in 64, and there's one that
Right.
takes 2 in 64. So we could do the same here.
Right.
From
Seconds.
seconds doesn't take seconds, then milliseconds, and microseconds?
It does, yes. There are 2 optional parameters, not 1.
Okay.
Yeah.
He said
But there's
he
one
said
that just
2,
takes
so
1
I
in
thought it was just
64.
2, not 2 optionals. Right. And again,
Yeah.
it came down to the number of defaults. That one had 2, so we made an overload that lopped them off. This one had 1, so we didn't.
Can you
Yeah, I
remind me
mean-
of the motivation for doing that only when there are 2 or more optional parameters?
Yeah, the problem comes down to, like, I think it was the Azure SDK that did usability studies where you instantiated the client and the client took like 12 optional parameters. And a lot of people didn't parse the code completion correctly, where the arguments are in brackets. So they didn't realize that they don't have to specify them. So a lot of people burn time trying to pass in 12 things. And so the takeaway was for commonly used APIs, don't just rely on optionals. Like if you like promote the simpler one by just having one overload that only has the required ones. And we basically said the threshold is, 2, 3, or whatever you want to say, right? There's some threshold.
So we decided
Yeah.
to make API rule in order to work around confusing UI.
Well,
Well,
I mean,
it's
you
user
could argue that.
confusion.
But I think it's the same thing with prefixing API names. You could say, oh, it just works around code completion. It's just like, well, whatever UX you come up with, arguably there's just more moving pieces you confront people with, right? So it's always easier to have one thing that has fewer moving pieces, right?
Because let's
I mean,
imagine
I'm amenable to this argument, by the way. Like, if we believe this API shape is the right shape anyway, regardless of expression trees, I'm fine with saying yes. What I am, I guess, opposing to is trying to work around arbitrary usages in expression trees by adding overloads, because that doesn't strike me as sustainable.
Yeah, I do think like Tarek makes kind of a convincing argument that if you look at the time span from methods in isolation, it looks like it's following a simple rule that like, hey, everything with optional arguments has an overload with no optional arguments, and from milliseconds is the only exception. So it's just kind of weird. Like if you know the rule, then you know why. But
yeah, I mean the usability motivation for why we have the overload is take a thing that takes 12 parameters. You're not familiar with it, even if you don't notice that they're all in square brackets. It's you say new, or you're looking at the documentation. It's like, wait, there are 12 things I need to deal with here. It's like, oh no, I needed one. One can do it, and then there's customization I can do. So it's just about the amount of cognitive load that we put on somebody the first time they hit a method.
Right. Yeah, but to Stefan's point, right? I mean, we could just say, fuck it, on this API, we just follow there's always one that takes only the required. And so at that point, 4 milliseconds is the only outlier. So
Make it self-consistent.
I think I'm cool with that. Like I would not oppose the proposal. I would just say I would oppose it based on the stated reason, not because of the API.
I mean, yeah, like the red line is correct from guidelines if we think that it looks asymmetric compared to everything else just because it's the only thing that has only one optional parameter, then sure.
Yeah.
But honestly, I don't think we would take this change just for aesthetics if there wasn't a second problem, because we'd say, why would we add a method that has no value? Like, we're making our IL bigger with no reason.
I mean, yes.
We do have a
well, we
reason,
each
which
get
is
to pick our own reason to improve it. Yeah,
which is
like,
fix
they don't
this
all have
thing
to
for
be the same
10.
reason.
But
Yeah.
Well, the reason, so for example, what I wouldn't do, so like to me, it also depends on what the API is, right? You can make exactly the same example, I guess, with any of our APIs that take cancellation tokens, right? Unless the type in question already has the pattern where there are overloads without cancellation token, I would not do that here, because our general guidance is cancellation tokens are just optional parameters, period. We don't have overloads without them. And so I do think it kind of depends on, how we set the precedent. Like I would say in this case, the whole type has this pattern. Fine, adding this one overload seems consistent to me. I would agree that we would only do it if there is a break. So in that sense, the break itself doesn't matter to me. Any source breaking change would be in the same bucket. I guess I'm opposed to saying, oh, if somebody uses an API and expression trees and there's optionals involved, yeah, give you an overload. I would say no. The answer to that is hard no. It would depend on the specifics.
so it may be
means-
that if we're overloading an existing method, we don't want to add, or we need to think about adding an overload that only has one default parameter. Because the only reason we care is it broke existing code. If this was a completely new method group, I think we would not change this right now.
Yeah, it's a weird combination of,
Yeah.
like it's a weird situation, right? Because we had the double and long overload before, and then we added the default parameters. Like, it's not every day we're adding overloads like that.
Right. Well, I think we just had the double.
Sorry,
They
you're
only
right.
had the double
Yeah.
one.
And then when we added it to avoid the floating points, we added this one of let's do it in one and not add a bunch of overloads, because the from days has days, hours, minutes, milliseconds, microseconds, and it's like we don't need that many overloads of that one concept.
Yeah, I guess my point is like before we just had the double, but if we had done the normal thing, right, and then just added an optional parameter to an overload kind of at the end, but double was still the first argument, we
Right,
wouldn't
then
have
the
this
double
problem.
would have bound, but it's that
Yeah.
we did type variance while getting longer with only optionals, and then apparently that's
Exactly.
what confused the expression tree. So
Pretty
that
rare
probably
scenario
won't come
overall.
up very often. I don't know if we have a good way of saying that we can automatically add tests for current method groups to use link expressions as a canary for this, but I guess it's a thing for somebody to think about. So it is
I guess
broken
the
for
problem
9.
is, it's like,
It can just
yeah.
be unbroken for 10. So an 8 to 10 upgrade won't break, but anybody using 9, that's the STS pain, I guess.
Yeah, all
Yeah,
the
that's-
justification the LTS only people need.
The fix for link expressions to work around it in 9 is also not a difficult one and works down level, which is change that 1000 to 1000.0.
Or D.
Be explicit that it's a double and going to be a double, and that's going to avoid any of the issues. And
Or
it
just
will
say
ensure
0, right?
compatible behavior in the case that long versus double would differ, such as if the long was over 2 to the power of 52.
Yeah. Yeah, there's a trivial workaround. I think that's generally true. You pick the overload you want by casting.
Yeah, or passing the optional parameter. You can do that. You just pass 0 next to it and you will be good.
But that wouldn't work in 8. But yeah,
That's where the
The double
usability
thing.
study people came from. They all use
Yeah.
link expressions.
like if you were like cross compiling or something. But
Yeah, if you're cross-compiling .0 or D.
Or hard
Or heaven
cast.
forbid you write
or-
an if there.
F would probably also work, because I think float to doubles. Yeah, because float can't go to long without a thing. So there are lots of fixes you can take.
So would we also remove the optional argument at the same time as proposed here?
I mean, why would you leave it? Because it would never qualify?
yeah, it would be weird to leave it. Like it would be vestigial, right?
Because the only time it
It
would
makes
call
sense
it,
once you have
it
more
would
than...
call this one instead. We need a method that takes 2 longs, but we're still providing one.
I don't think it's a breaking change to do this. The
It's
only
not.
people that would
That
The only people that would break would be reflection callers, because they might say like, oh, I expected this thing to have a default value, and now I'm getting back null instead of 0. But like,
But we-
reflection is its own weird thing.
And we do this all the time, right?
We-
when adding an overload to a method with default values. This is like the standard pattern is to remove the default values on the old overload.
Yeah, I'm not too worried about reflection.
Yeah,
mode.
it's the required versioning pattern to keep source compatible when you're adding new overloads as well.
Yep. No, that's the big problem, I think.
I
Alright.
think we already did that before. I mean, changing some default parameters, right?
Right.
That's what we're saying. Yeah, we do it a lot.
Yeah.
All right. So we happy with that for 10?
Yeah, looks good.
All right. Next up, read-only span of char overloads for string normalization extensions. 87757.
Yes. So today we have string dot normalize and string dot is normalized. And these two methods on the string class today do the normalization, and in case of normalization, it returns a new string. So it always allocate a new string for the normalized string. So this proposal is to allow similar C API to work with the spans. So users can have the option to avoid the allocation if possible. Yeah, we encountered this scenario also while I was working on the tokenizers. I mean, like I came across scenarios that it need to do the normalization, and doing the normalization with every single string that passed to the tokenizer will be very much costly. I mean, it will allocate a lot of memory. So having API like this, I mean, it will help in such scenarios. So basically, this is matching the two APIs that we have on the string already. I mean, that is normalize and normalize, but here I'm calling it try normalize instead. So the first one is normalized. I mean, here the proposal is taking the span and the form of the normalization form. I mean, like compact or decompose or decompose. I mean, and it return you true or false according to if the string is normalized or not. And second one is try normalize. It's taking the span of characters, and it will take the destination and also the normalization form, and it does this normalization and return operation status. So operation status can be one of three values: either success, so the operation is successful, or it can be out of memory. I mean, not enough. Yeah, I mean, the buffer is not enough. I mean, to hold the results, or it can return a failure. I mean, because like normalization operation also can return failure if it encounter some malformed, I mean, characters inside the string, like malformed, like surrogate pairs, for example, or something like this.
Right.
This is why I choose to use operation status for that.
Right. So once it's operation status, it should look like an operation status method. And you do have a fourth case, which is not enough data, which is if you end with an unpaired surrogate.
Yes.
That was not an error
no,
because they
no.
could need just to give you one more
No,
value.
I'm not handling this case because
You have to.
normally
Your operation status. If you're
Yeah.
being operation status, you need to do it right.
Operation status is meant for streaming APIs, and streaming APIs might have their input chopped off in the middle of a surrogate pair.
So the only needs more data would be if literally the last thing is a whichever surrogate half comes first, and that would be you need to give me one more byte, or sorry, one more char.
Also, do you even have the ability to restart this from the middle if you run out of destination space?
No, I mean, you have to initiate a new call because we depend on the OS for that. I mean, either ICU or NLS. So it's just one call to the OS to do the normalization. It doesn't understand any state between calls. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't think operation status is the right return value for this because Operation status also implies that it can be restarted. And I know that NLS does not allow restarting, and it sounds like you just said ICU doesn't either.
Yes.
Yeah, I wouldn't do operation status, and I would literally just do a try pattern.
And then it has to throw on invalid input.
So what? It will return what? I mean, as in.
Boolean. If you're a try,
Yeah,
so if
well,
your method
for
starts with try, you have to be
unpaired.
bool. And so you get true, it succeeded, false, destination is too small, and throw for anything else.
Yep.
Yeah,
But-
yeah, I mean, like, I understand that. I mean, but my point
But are we
is,
saying we don't have a high performance API for APIs that we don't want to throw but have multiple error cases?
It's
That's
not
right.
that. It's not that. It's a operation status in particular implies several things, including the ability to stream the input, like to process the input in chunks. But the underlying workhorses that we use for doing this don't support chunking. They have to have the entire input available to them all at once. Which means that we also can't say, well, process half the input because that's all the destination buffer you have right now, and then we'll call you again with the second half of the input. Like, there's no state preservation.
So it's not an API pattern
Isn't
problem.
part
it's
of
a-
that
Tanner?
And
it isn't
every-
part of the reason why they can't do chunking, because there's cases like for example, one case of Unicode normalization will transform A followed by accent into the single Unicode character A accent, and
Right.
if you've chunked it between the A and the accent, then it can't do it correctly, and so that's
Right.
part of why it can't support chunking.
I mean, you could theoretically see a thing that like just stopped before these like surrogate pairs and gave you like cars read instead of cars
Well-
written.
Because it would gain a
That's
it would
not
gain a
case
bool
of
is final.
surrogate pair.
Okay, sorry. Yeah,
It's not
but
that
you could imagine it
Yeah.
stopping before the A preceding the accent character. Sorry if I used the wrong terminology. But yeah.
It would be
It
like
means
base
that if you-
64. It's
Yeah.
you would need to tell it, is this the end of my buffer? And if yes, then it would be an A there, and if not, it would have to look for something that it considers to be a valid breakpoint, like a word break, and that's not the end of the buffer, and say, I'm unwilling to go past here, you have to tell me that I'm done, because otherwise I might need to turn this trailing A into an A acute.
In the worst case scenario, the entire string might consist of characters which contribute to the normalization, which means that if you're following the standard pattern of doubling your buffer and trying again over and over and over again, this now becomes an O of n squared operation rather than an amortized O of n operation, because you're looking at the same data over and over and over and over.
so Levi, you are talking about like if you are not passing enough buffer to hold the result.
Yes. Yeah, I'm saying that in the worst case, try normalize, where you're trying to avoid an allocation, actually has worse performance than a standard allocating normalize call. It is possible to force an input to go into that degenerate case. Because in a standard normalized call, you're only looking at the data twice, right? You're looking at the data once to calculate the destination size, and then you're actually processing the data after that. In this case, if you have a double your buffer and try again, like you're looking at I guess it's not n squared, it's n log n, but still, like that is worse than O of n.
Right. But
Yes, but
assuming
it depends.
one doubling
it
would
depends
do
on
it.
the
It's-
caller at the end. I mean, like the caller is the one which is like can provide whatever enough buffer for
Well,
that.
does the color, where does the input come from? That's the thing. Is the input hostile?
Can you reason about it?
Yeah, the input can come from anything. I mean, like you don't have control about the input, but you have control about the size of the buffer you provide.
Right, but are there heuristics that anyone can apply? Like destination will always be smaller, or sorry, will be no bigger, or will be no more than twice as big, or
Yeah, I mean, like providing twice big, it will be enough.
Oh, that's guaranteed to work.
I'm like 99%, I would say yes, but I didn't check if this is the case.
Because
I'm not
one
sure about
thing-
like if you have one character can split into like more than 2 characters or 3 characters. So,
Because I wonder if maybe we should actually just expose what both ICU and NLS do under the covers, which is an API that tells you how large the output would be, and an API that just says do the conversion. Because that way you could call the try method, which takes a source and a destination buffer, and it's either going to succeed or it's not. But if you need to know strongly ahead of time how big the destination needs to be, just call like get normalized length or something, because that's what we already have for things like UTF-8 encoding, right?
but the problem here is like you are going to process the input twice at that time, which is also
and if
have
the
some
try
concerns.
returns false, you're going to process it 3 times.
Yes, but this is not the common cases. So
Right. So
if you pay, I mean, like if you pay for common cases would be bad, but if you
not
pay
necessarily,
for
right? Because you would say for the common case, what you say is like if 99% of the cases go into a destination that's twice the size of the source, right? Then
Yeah.
the typical calling pattern would be call like get a buffer that you think is big enough, call
Yeah.
try normalize with overwhelming probability it will succeed. If it fails, then
Mhm.
call the well, how many bytes did I actually need? And then allocate the buffer and do it again. So the common case is 1 time, the fallback case is 3 times, which seems like a decent trade-off.
Okay, so you are saying that the pattern of coding this is to call try normalize first, and if you don't have enough buffer at that time, you will ask for the size and you do it again, right?
Yeah, I mean, we do
Okay.
this pattern already with things like getting environment variables from the operating system. Like we just assume it fits into like 256 bytes or whatever. And if that fails, then we say, fine, tell us how much we actually needed.
Okay, yeah, I'm not objecting to have API to return you the size. I mean, yeah.
But I think it addresses your concern though about like if you want to expose the absolute fastest possible thing where people avoid the initial count, then I think you can do that by having a separate API that gets you a count. Yeah, what Jeremy has on screen here.
Unless we want
Okay,
an
so-
overload of is normalized that outs the length, but that feels weird.
Okay, the only thing I don't like in this proposal is like it can throw in non-formal string, so users will not have any option to do anything except catching the exception and
But that's
try to
true of the current one.
Yes, but I'm not saying the current one is good.
So what do you expect users to do if they see that the input is malformed, just straight up reject it?
Yeah, most likely they will either parse the string to find this malformed stuff themselves, or just like use default value and continue. I mean, saying like, yeah, I mean like this is bad string, I don't care much, I just continue and without normalization. It's up to the user what to do. I mean, but at least I mean like they will not be stuck with the exception at that time.
So going back to the operation status thing, even though, so if, I'll relent a little bit. If you don't have a chars read parameter and you always output 0 chars written on failure, any type of failure at all, then the risk of somebody abusing operation status or incorrectly interpreting it goes down significantly, I think.
So, to quote from Framework Design Guidelines, exceptions are the primary way of reporting errors in the framework.
Yeah.
So, the, it would need to justify why this, of all things, is special when I don't know that I've ever normalized a string, so I don't know that it's
Yeah,
high
as I
performance enough
mentioned,
that we care to deviate from our norms of use exceptions.
I care more about the scenario more than the design guidelines here, because like if you take the tokenizer scenario that I'm talking about here, like the tokenizer just getting string and need to normalize it. So if it's row exception, it's bad. It's not good because like you can get this input string from anywhere. I mean, like you don't guarantee that the string will be in good shape all the time. So and throwing
Oh.
exception will not be acceptable at that time.
So I know that we have things like int.try parse because it's common enough, unfortunately, for somebody to like fat finger an integer, for instance. Like, is somebody really going to fat finger a string so that it doesn't normalize properly? Like, how does such a string get into the system in the first place?
No, I mean the system can come up from input. I mean like ChatGPT, for example. I mean like anybody can paste any garbage there and say like do something with it.
Yeah.
If they paste
and-
garbage, it takes more time.
The
I-
the practical example here, I think, would be someone has pasted Unicode text in one of the more naive text editors. Then they went and did a select where they were trying to manually select a range of the text, and they happened to only select part of a combined character set. You know, there's a bunch of emoji, for example, that are 3 or 4 characters, and some text
yeah.
editors actually allow you to right shift over each one without the cursor actually moving. So someone probably did that. They copied too little. They pasted it somewhere to try and normalize it. It's going through a web service. It fails. But I'm not sure that that necessarily entails getting an exact error status type result. And I don't think operation status would be the right enum for that type of scenario if we were to expose a more direct, like, error code type information.
Yeah. Because this sounds like the scenario is you just want failures to be fast enough where a system can kick it out and do something different, right?
Mhm.
Because you also expect that failures will be common enough where the need to reject them quickly is paramount, right?
Yeah, I'm not sure about the failure will be common enough, but it's possible. I mean, this is the point I'm trying to avoid. I mean, like if it happens, so it's better not to throw exception on it, but at least to notify.
Is-
Yeah. Go ahead.
Exceptions are expensive, but they're not more expensive than things like networking or tokenize a large stream of text. So is it even going to be measurable in the face of the expense that's
So
happening?
You expect like everyone want to call the CPI will wrap it inside try-catch? I mean, this is my point.
No, what I'm thinking is like if I'm calling this API and the API says the input is malformed and I don't even know how to process it, what I'm going to do as a caller is just turn around and throw an exception.
Not really. I mean, like in the AI scenarios, I don't think this is the case. I mean, like
Then what are you gonna do? It said it can't normalize.
yeah, I mean, like
So-
e-
so I
either,
think
either
the
not
pra-
process it at all or ignore it or just like notify with some message to the user like ChatGPT saying like, yeah, I mean, like your text is not good enough or something like this. But you don't expect like exception will be thrown at that time.
I think the more practical example here is that exceptions are great when you have things where the application is going to expect to, in common cases, basically fail out and die. They
Right.
aren't so great in cases like networking where if expected failures because hardware is complex. They're not great in cases like UI, where
Oh, yeah.
your typical experience isn't going to be to crash out your app. It's going to be to surface to the user there was some type of validation error or similar, and you're going to display some UI saying there was a failure here and you want to continue gracefully. And so that's the case where, like, you're doing validation type scenarios where the exception model isn't as great. And it sounds like that's what the try normalize here is trying to handle, is basically the user's giving an input, the backend needs to process it and then report back to the user an error validation status, and they want to do that without having to try catch.
Yeah, and the answer is that's not .NET.
Yeah, so I understand what you were saying, Tanner, but the conversation so far has not given any indication whatsoever that this is going to be anything other than a vanishingly rare scenario.
Yeah.
Because the let's return an error code means we're Win32. Every function returns an error code and then outs its data elsewhere.
I don't necessarily think that's the case. I think I think you can make a distinction between types of errors, because you still have the classification of, like, oh, this is a clear developer error versus the classification of this is a potential user error, and that's why we have bool try parse, for example. And you also have the cases like networking where we do still return status codes because we know that it's common enough and necessary enough to handle that way that it's still appropriate to not do exceptions.
It also has a
think
lot
you
of
can
exceptions.
Still make the distinction without going every API needs.
Right, but it's
Needs
the
it.
way that you, like, if this returns oh, your input is malformed, and then that means that function that called it is supposed to return your input was malformed until you get all the way back to the original request handler. Like, that's not how people write .NET code. You throw an exception, you catch it, you're out of request handler, and you return your input was garbage. Move on. Like, that's .NET programming.
I mean, but though during review we do tend to defer to the feature teams, though, just by virtue of, like, the feature teams are best positioned to understand the scenarios that they have, right?
I am saying not convinced is the wrong answer. I am convinced Tarek is wrong.
Well, okay. So
Wow.
so let's say that there is a need for some reason to kick this out quickly. Are there patterns other than operation status and try that would allow returning this? That would allow returning basically a try state, saying it succeeded, it failed for reason A, or it failed for reason B? I mean, operation status is the closest thing.
It is the closest thing, but operation status
Well,
is intended for streaming API, as you said.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think the general concept of operation status, though, isn't just necessarily operation status, the enum we expose. It's a more general concept of if you have a recoverable thing where
Right.
recovery or chunking is necessary, define some enum that fits that
Right.
that recovery and chunking mechanism. And in this case, this is kind of more akin to regex, for example, where regex has a structured return concept that then has the ability to query properties off of it, such as isMatch, getting group data or other things off of it. And we have similar things with other more complex parsing or string handling APIs like JSON, XML. It's common to CSV handlers, etc. So, I don't think it necessarily has to be operation status. If there is a need, it could be another enum that fits it, or it could be some kind of structured string normalization result type data where you can query the necessary information off of it to fit the other parsing. It's just not clear that that's needed here.
Well, Tarek, would it be okay if Tarek were to invent, like, his own enum for this?
No, I mean, not in this meeting. I I would be okay with it if the proposal, which I don't think we want to invent right now, was I'm trying to write a normalization validator and I want to be able to report where an error is and maybe it can support jumping past the error and moving on. But just oh, by the way, the input's garbage, move on with life. If we want that, then make it get normalized length returns a negative number. Like, but I don't think we need the try normalize that, like, again, this is a guideline from .NET Framework Design Guidelines 1. Do not return error codes.
Yeah.
Use exceptions. Exceptions are how we do it. We add things like the try methods when this is the one common, we need to move on, and maybe you can do something more clever than throwing an exception yourself. I've not heard a description here other than you're going to abort the process. So you're going to abort the operation, which means it's an exception.
Yeah.
Like, we don't want everyone inventing their own way of doing things. That's why we have this meeting.
So let me go back and ask about operation status. I mean, like, why we have in operation status that the operation is failed for other reasons.
Operation
we have to-
status, like Tanner said, operation status allows you to it allows you to stream data so you can skip past the data that's invalid, which normalization would not allow you to do, because normalization is a one-shot API.
But why we restricting operation status for this scenario only?
Because that's what
It's
literally
not that it's
every
push-
operation status method in the framework
Yeah.
does.
It's not that it's restricting operation status. It's like
I'm
the
not
enum
getting this. Sorry, I mean, like,
the enum
from
values
the name
of
operation status, like you are performing some operation and you are getting the status for this operation. It doesn't mean that you have to use it in the streaming data or anything else. From the name, it doesn't tell that. So why
We're going
we
to
are
quick breaks.
restricting?
We'll be right back.
Okay.
Yeah, I think that operation status is probably a bad name for the enum, but the intent of it is to support recovery of complex chunking and streaming APIs like transcoding for the system text encoding.
Yeah,
Notably, those
I
are
understand we invented for this scenario, but why we are restricting it for this scenario only? Why we cannot use it in general way? That it just return operation status. You can use it in any scenario you want. It doesn't have to be streaming one.
Again, it's
because there's nothing useful you can do with the extra information at that point other than just fail.
No, in normalization it does, right?
it doesn't.
Well, no,
Why?
because you can't.
You're not
recover
returning
it.
where the error
most you
was.
can do is the same as it.
Operation status things that return invalid data tell you where the error was. Or
And
rather,
the-
they tell you
the
how much data
compiler
they can
also
process
pushes
before they
you
hit an
to
error.
handle. And the compiler also pushes you to handle all enum cases that are returnable, not a subset. So, if you have an operation status that can't returns need more data, the compiler and language is still Gush devs to handle that case, and they won't know that they don't actually need to.
Okay. Okay.
But yes, it's so far every operation status has had this shape, which is how much data did I process and how much did I write, and then the intent of it is that you can then recover either using the same buffer for the next chunk or what have you, but that's what operation status is for. It's for writing span to hexadecimal, and when for some reason you didn't know that your destination was going to be twice the source length.
Yeah, that's interesting that
Well, I mean, really it was for base 64 where you need to count spaces
if
and
if we are
stuff.
saying like has to be used in this exact pattern, why we didn't encapsulate all of that inside one type? I mean, not just operation status, but number of written stuff or other parameters that it's coming as out parameter here. Why we need to have like every signature have those outs while we can return it in some time. I mean, like, we inventing some pattern. I mean, like, yeah, I understand the reason and I understand like the logic behind it. But I'm not seeing that we have a way to address the case that I'm talking about here for normalization about. I want to perform something, I want to return, I want to avoid exceptions, and I want to return some indication about like if the operation succeeded or failed for the content of the string itself.
And the answer is, right now in .NET, we generally don't have an answer for that, because the design guideline of everything .NET is throw an exception on failure. And then we carve out cases that we think are special, and we say we get, for span writing, we get the try write, which is return false for destination too small. We have the processing things where it's, this could be a malformed structured input, and you want to just say, nope, it wasn't. Because maybe you're running it down, a bunch of type testers to find what you're doing. But I've not heard a scenario here other than, well, the operation failed, and I want to tell someone that, and that's just an exception. They're not that expensive.
Okay.
And notably, they were made even faster in recent .NET versions.
Okay, so we are saying that we should throw exceptions here, right? I mean, this proposal, and the callers is free to catch it or to do anything with it.
If you think it's useful for get normalized length to return -1 on normalization won't succeed, go for it. But try normalize once they've called it. They've said they want it to normalize, and the only thing that won't throw is destination too small.
Okay. Yeah.
A get length that returns a negative number on an invalid input is probably hard to use, but when somebody then makes a new array of -1, they'll get bit by that. So.
Okay. Yeah, that's fine. Last question I have here in the string class. I mean, we have this normalized method, which is take one parameter, and another one which is take two parameters. I mean, one parameter which is, what I mean is not using the default parameters for that. I mean, so I'm just asking about like, are we okay with that? I mean, like using here the default parameters instead of providing two overloads?
That is, using default parameters in this case is preferred, yes.
Okay. Yeah, that's just wanted to confirm that. Yeah. Yeah, this sounds good to me.
Are we happy with the name get normalized length? I was thinking that name. Levi said the name. I wrote it down.
I'm fine with the name.
Yes, fine. Yes, fine.
Somebody's incredibly fine with it.
My only question is, a new class string normalization extension is the right place to put it?
This is an existing class.
No, this existing class, yes.
Oh, it is? It's an existing class. Okay, never mind then.
Yeah, I had the same.
We introduced this class a while ago while we were dividing globalization outside the core, which is doing exactly what string.normalize does. And so.
kind of surprising that didn't use default values before, but is there a reason?
I'm not sure the default values was introduced during that time. I don't know. Because I think because a string class had those same signatures before.
I mean, the reason we had those extension methods is because we decoupled globalization from the core.
That's right. Yes.
At that point, we didn't care, but we just, because I think the existing methods on string didn't do that either, so we just didn't do that.
Yes.
This is in the system namespace. Great.
Yeah, well, the idea was that it's just silently binds when you recompile code.
Yeah. So I guess do we
so
want
one
them as
question I had is,
extension
like,
methods or static invocation?
I mean-
on a string, you mean? On string class?
Well, it's so as Levi. I feel like Levi was leading up to, wow, everyone's going to see these extension methods because it's in system. So it's
I mean, it's already on string though, so it may as well be on Rajchar.
fair enough.
Yeah. I mean, we already have specialized extension methods for read-only span char, right, for trim and other things, so
Yeah.
that seems within the... Like, read-only span of char seems incredibly specialized, so I think that's fine to me.
Yeah.
One question I have for the proposal that we have right now, I was zoning out earlier, so when you have get normalized length and normalized, does it mean the work happens twice now in order to determine the size, or...
Yep.
If you call them in that order, yes, but you don't have to.
So you can just guess?
You can just guess, yeah. And if your guess is wrong, then you take the penalty of computing the length.
Gotcha.
But I think, Tarek, you were making a good argument earlier that, for the most part, people can give a guess that's almost always going to work, right?
Yes.
So that means if you do that, then it's actually a one-shot instead of a two-shot. And you only fall back if your guess was wrong. Which I mentioned we do for things like reading the environment block. Like we just guess what the environment variable length is, so that we don't have to query its length ahead of time.
I see.
And if the guess was wrong, then we say, screw it, we'll go down the slow path.
Yeah, I guess that makes sense.
Happy?
Get normalized length is also going to throw if there's going to be an overflow, right? I assume. Not just if the
an
invalid.
integer overflow.
Right.
I mean,
I would hope.
one would
So
hope.
there are multiple failure cases.
I guess if you give a 2 billion input thing and it grows, then yes, get normalized length could throw because there is no span that you could create that it would be able to write to.
Right.
But also, what are you doing?
I mean, I don't know. I'm giving it a whole bunch of like accented e's as input.
Yeah, but like War and Peace isn't even that long.
Sure.
What are you doing asking to normalize the library?
I mean, but there's, every failure case from every one of our APIs has to be well understood and well documented, right?
Well, I mean, yeah. I mean, from a performance standpoint, I don't care about errors that happen once on some random person's machine.
Yeah.
But yes.
But okay, the span indexer cannot go beyond int max, right?
Right. So you would have to detect that and fail it because somebody
Okay.
could give you that, right?
Yeah.
I mean, does the underlying NLS thing work in terms of D word or Q word?
I believe it's in terms of D word. So
Or
NLS
off
would
T.
report it. When we get the data back, we would look at the conversion failure and say, yep, that's bad.
Yeah.
It's just something. It's a code review thing, but yeah.
Well, I just meant even if you give it something that's the max signed int length input, and it needs to grow by 2.5, then that would overflow a D word.
Yes, it would.
Presumably, NLS is going to get
It's,
unhappy at
it's
that,
in-
but we have the boundary condition of the signed versus unsigned return.
It's interesting because like we are calling the OS at the end, so I'm wondering about what is the OS doing for that.
Yep.
I mean,
As long as it's returning if it's returning an error, then we can surface that error. If it's returning something that won't convert to the data type that we needed to convert to, then we would surface that as a custom error, right?
I mean, it's just overflow exception, right?
Yeah. But it means someone has to put a checked block in there.
Yep.
That's what it comes down to.
okay. Yeah.
Or a custom exception of the input expands to too big of an output. But
The point wasn't necessarily to litigate all the different ways that could go wrong. It was just to say, like, there are ways beyond the source is invalid that could cause failures. And those would need to be documented, presumably.
Alright, sounds like we're happy with that.
Happy.
Emma, one of these days you should decide to be mean and not show things that still have suggestion checked when they check API ready for review.
I mean, to be honest, I don't even know why we have that label. Like,
Fair enough.
maybe some of us are tracking that. To me, that's like any other feature. Unless somebody decides it's an API, who cares?
I think it's mostly just supposed to be for, this isn't somebody reporting a bug, it's somebody wanting to have a discussion, but the discussion's not over yet, so don't triage it away.
I mean,
or look at it and say it's been idle for 3 years, so triage it away.
I mean, to me, it's like any other feature request, right? It might be behavior, it might be a scenario, or it might be a missing API, right? It could be, like, it seems like it's, yeah, I don't know. You're trying to classify something that is very nebulous to begin with, so I'm not sure that adds a ton of value, but that's why I just ignore it.
Alright, stream reader constructors, documentation and implementation don't agree, 106.236.
I think Steven marked this as ready for review.
Yeah, and
I
Steve
did.
should
Someone had opened an issue and submitted a PR to remove the question, or to add a question mark to the encoding parameter of StreamReader. Apparently, we did the same for StreamWriter in .NET 9. Then didn't do it for StreamReader.
I see. So it's basically saying it is nullable. We just didn't mark it as such.
I believe the implementation can work with it, but I also think that we were explicitly validating that it was. I'd have to double check, but I believe we were validating that it was non-null and throwing an exception at the constructor.
So I guess then the request is to just let it go through and mark it as nullable. Yeah.
Yeah.
I believe so. I can double check that. I'm not functioning 100% right now.
Yeah, the shorter constructors forward that parameter to the longer public constructor, and the longer public constructor is indeed marked nullable.
I
Okay,
see.
yeah.
And this, I guess
Yeah.
I see. So the shorter ones are
It's just a
saying
mismatch.
if you call me, you have to pass one in, but if you call the other one, then you don't have to. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I
but
see.
that it just passes it on and null works.
Yeah, so we're not validating it. Maybe we were validating in StreamWriter and we weren't in StreamReader. I don't remember.
Yeah.
Anyhow,
Actually, we could
it's just to add question marks.
Yeah. I mean that makes sense.
I
It's
thought-
just like what.
In general,
Stream
we didn't need to talk about question marks here.
So what is the behavior? It's like UTF-8 or
Yeah, UTF-8. Which we should check the documentation, because on full framework it might use the current code page rather than UTF-8. We need to double check that. So the documentation should just be correct in both cases.
I mean, I doubt we would have changed it.
Actually, no. In full framework requires that parameter to be specified.
How you
Interesting.
figure? Oh, the long constructor requires it.
Yeah, full framework will actually throw an argument null exception if you give it null, which is weird to me, but okay. And if you call an overload that does not take that argument, then it assumes UTF-8 and just passes it right in. That's cool, I guess.
Fun times.
Very odd that there's
Yeah.
a mismatch here between full framework and core.
I mean, just process-wise, I thought we said if something was just fixing nullability annotations, we didn't need it to come to review.
Even
It's-
if it's
it's
updating docs.
It's
Like there's the docs explicitly say it throws an argument null exception if encoding is null.
it does on full framework.
It does on .NET 8 too. I mean, the docs say for like the .NET
Right.
8 docs, for example.
That's just because we didn't change the docs. Right. So I'm just wondering what we're discussing here. If just
Is
do
this
we-
the right behavior? What
Okay.
behavior should this have?
I think the behavior that is proposed makes perfect sense to me. It's effectively just formalizing the existing behavior.
Right.
Yeah, I don't know when we decided to say that it would default to UTF-8 for all the constructors, but I don't think we would change .NET Core at this time to go back to throwing, which means adding the question marks seems right.
What I thought the default was always UTF-8. It's just that on full framework, if you call the overloads that take one, you were required to pass one in.
Correct.
Right, but that someone introduced that behavioral difference into Core intentionally, or at least one assumes it was intentional. And
Yeah, I think we did that. I remember correctly. The problem was on the that we wanted to pass in things like buffer size without ending up having to specify all the other ones. And I think that's the same thing we did on file. It's the same thing we did on Streamwriter, and I think we just forgot to update the question marks here.
right. And then the docs, that argument null exception, assuming that we still have unified documentation in however we're building things these days, gets to have the .NET framework only, or whatever wording it gets for.
This was changed in 3x. I'm looking through the history.
3x. Oh yeah, that's
So justification was, I believe a relatively common need is to set leave open to true while keeping encoding and buffer size at their default values.
that's right. It was leave open. Yes.
Yeah.
That's right.
That was a justification for this change.
And that doesn't apply for Streamreader, apparently, which is weird. So Streamreader, you don't. So if you use Streamreader, it will always close it, I guess.
Well, sorry, that was the justification for Streamwriter,
Right.
and Streamreader, I
Doesn't
guess,
have-
just got pulled into the same change.
But Streamreader doesn't have a leave open, right? So I guess.
It does.
It does in the long one that's not seen here,
Oh,
which
Because
which got the question mark.
Yeah.
I see.
So that's this guy.
So then we just dropped.
Yeah. It's because they just wanted to pass in the stream and then comma leave open colon true and then just have everything else defaulted.
Okay, then I disagree
makes
with the
sense.
proposal as it's written because it doesn't make sense to go to the other one and make them optional then.
No, so it's here. So the long constructor says encoding is nullable. The shorter constructors say it's not nullable, but they just forward to the long constructor.
Yeah,
Yeah,
maybe
they're
I
just
missed-
wrong. We couldn't
I
make
thought
it.
the proposal was to take the one that has up everything until buffer size and mark them optional, but I guess it's just the longer one that they put in the PR. Oh yeah, that goes past buffer size. Never mind. Yeah,
Yeah,
okay.
we're not making anything optional here. We're just making it nullable,
Oh yeah, okay, fair enough.
which
Yeah,
I think is okay.
yeah, that makes perfect sense. Then.
And
Yeah,
then update the docs as it
Yep.
says. Sure.
I agree. That Yeah, reading is hard.
And then if you're targeting net standard, God help you.
Well, I mean,
Because it could throw or it could get UTF-8. Hooray!
you're already in this unfortunate situation if you multi-target net standard
Mhm.
and you allow nullability annotations that one of your legs won't have the validation.
Oh yeah, mostly it's that like if you test on .NET 8 say, and then you're like, oh, I'm going to target net standard, and then well everything compiles cleanly now. But now you're going to get interesting behaviors on other runtimes because we've changed the behavior between .NET Framework and .NET Core.
I mean, that happens anytime we take something that was exceptional and make it non-exceptional.
Yeah, you're absolutely right.
And that is why if you care about net framework, you run unit tests on it.
Absolutely.
And why the net standard version of these will say it's null rejecting, even if that's not always true.
Well, it doesn't, right? Like the full framework one.
Says they're
will-
oblivious.
Yeah, they will
Oh,
flip
fair
either
enough.
way.
Fair enough, because that standard was before the question marks.
They're really tildy, right? They're like, either one is fine.
All right.
Right. I'm
Tanner.
so sorry, Tanner. I only gave you 35 minutes, but maybe that helps you.
Yeah, so just continuing the general intrinsic yearly API reviews for x86 and x64, or just for x64. There is some new instructions coming to hardware for AVX10 v2. Several of these are answering known missing instructions from the existing instruction sets exposed. So the first ones are min-max. These ones allow you to compute min or max based on the control byte provided. And it follows the IEEE 754 behavior. Whereas today you have to emit a complex instruction sequence to ensure fully compliant IEEE results, this is a single instruction that does the correct behavior. And the control byte, as typical, allows you to pick what that is.
Oh, is this
So there's
because-
min-max and min-max scalar, following the existing general naming guideline of matching the underlying C intrinsic, the instruction name, and then differentiating by the scalar suffix where that's applicable.
Do we feel that
we use bytes, right, not nums for this?
Sorry, what?
We use bytes for this, right, not specialized enums? Is that right?
Right, because the underlying encoding is specifically 1 byte.
Okay.
Yeah. Do we feel that min max is the right name as opposed to min or max, or do we care?
Min max is the name of the C intrinsic and the name of the instruction, not min or max.
Yeah.
And given it's a specialized hardware intrinsic, I'd lean towards that, but I'm not opposed to min or max. It technically it's a little bit more complex than just min or max, because this does at the IEEE level there's minimum number, maximum number, and the other variations that exist. So it's really like 8 different things in one instruction.
Well, just the name min-max makes me think like you're building a chess gaming system.
I was just about to
Yeah.
say that. Like, I remember the min-max algorithm there as well.
Yeah.
But I mean, yeah, clearly you can't be both min and max, right? So
Yeah.
it kind of implies that, you pass in some value that chooses.
Also, given that the control byte is required, the people who would be calling this are probably familiar with the intrinsic, so would think to look for a name min-max, I would guess, because it matches the intrinsic name.
Or you don't think people just stumble into AVX 10v2 and call random methods on it?
I mean, I do.
I mean, if they just do the IntelliSense, go find me a thing that looks like this name, then yes. But
I mean, considering what arguments we're taking, again, like you're not calling this accidentally. It's
Right.
like
Indeed.
And min and max are still there for your use.
and given that it requires the constant byte control, I would guess we're not going to lift this. So my concern is if this was an operation we were going to end up trying to lift onto vector as instruction set agnostic, that the name is not
No, it,
approachable. But if we're leaving it just
If-
as the intrinsic name, I don't care.
yeah, for the cross-platform API, we do have APIs already, but those are explicitly separate overloads of minimum magnitude, minimum number, minimum magnitude number, maximum, etc. for the rest of them. So exactly matching the ones we exposed on the scalar types and math types. So there is no ambiguity with them.
And as you already have this precedence for V1, V2 in the name of the instruction set, is that how they ship them as well?
Yeah, that's how we discussed this last release. The new basically they when AVX 512 shipped, they were trying to do this like, have many independent optional ISAs type thing. That didn't pan out, so AVX 10 is their new converged ISA, and they've made a commitment moving forward to shipping effectively singular baselines that build incrementally on top of each other. And so you've just got 10.1, 10.2. The next ISA extension will be 10.3. We decided to do 10v1 as
So we basically say version is the minor.
Yeah.
So what happens if they ship at 10.2.1?
They have no plans on ever doing that because it would break their own model.
Yeah,
we could
It's
always-
kind of like how we've done with the .NET versions, where we've basically committed to not shipping minor versions ourselves. We've got a clear model for versioning moving forward now, and that's what they've done commitment-wise on their end too.
Until marketing changes it again. But I mean, we clearly have a transformation on this, which is we turn the period into a V, so it'd be
yeah, we could do that.
AVX 10 V2 V1.
Yeah, 'cause-
So
or R1.
Because we discussed doing underscore, and we were like, nah.
Yeah.
Notably on min-max scalar, the return type should be a vector, not a scalar. It should be vector 128 of double. To match what we've done for the other APIs. I missed that in the check, and that looks like the only scalar API that didn't get fixed.
What-
isn't the one below it?
Return vectors.
Yeah, those ones, instead of returning scalar double and scalar float, should be vector 128 of double and vector 128 of float. Because the actual instruction returns the entire vector, preserving the upper bits rather than zeroing them.
Can you remind me why we do inheritance?
To avoid you having to ship for all the older instruction sets.
Right.
So that
It's
it collapses the
to-
supporteds.
Yeah, it's to give a clear hierarchy for what the is supported means. So AVX 10 v2 is supported, implies that 10.1 is supported, implies that AVX 2 is supported, etc. And so there's a hierarchy users can understand there. It also means that technically they can do AVX 10 v2 dot, and they can get access to all of the down level ISAs that are implied as well. So they'll see everything from SSE, from SSE2, etc.
Right. That's the reason I was asking the question.
Which by the way, I actually really appreciate having that. Because what I do when I'm writing code is I literally just do avx2 dot, and then I can see everything.
Yeah.
If I know that my
Yep.
machine targets avx2, or that my app targets it.
Fair enough. Personally, I'm not a fan of. I mean, I'm fine with IntelliSense showing it in the what is callable, but I'm not a fan of the fact that the C# language lets you call static methods off of base types.
Oh yeah, like I'll always simplify the caller to whatever base class it's actually defined on, but just having it in IntelliSense just to begin with is, a godsend.
Fair enough. Sounds like how I use var. Write var, get the answer, and then tell it, now replace this with the right answer, so when I'm reading the code later, I know what it was.
Yes.
Alright, and left and right look consistent with what we've named things, value when it's a single input.
You have add methods. Should those not be add with rounding, or is the name that we use just add, even though rounding's taking place?
Yeah, we had just done add because there's always rounding that takes place with floating point. It's just that the default is too even, and this allows you to pick the rounding mode instead. Notably, we already have 512 versions. AVX10 v2 is bringing the same support that existed in AVX 512 to the 256-bit width as well. That way users have access to the functionality on hardware that does not provide 512-bit support.
Got it.
But if the ISAs are all rolling forward, how would you have 10.2 without 512?
So basically 512 was the thing that diverged, and because they have hardware where they don't want to or can't provide 512-bit support, such as their desktop units where there's not a lot of benefit to providing the 512-bit support, or their mobile units, what they did is they reconverged it. And so if you were to imagine 512 never having existed, AVX 512 never having existed, the correct incremental build up from AVX2 would have been provide the embedded broadcast, provide the embedded masking and embedded rounding support for the existing 128 and 256-bit ISAs, and then 512-bit is optional on top of that. So AVX 10.2 is basically doing the design that they feel they should have done originally, where you've got 128 as baseline, 256 builds on top of 128, and 512 builds on top of 256. And you can have the underlying ones without having the larger widths, whereas AVX 512 required you to provide 512-bit support to get access to all of the new stuff, which is what was problematic.
I mean, so this is really going back to what our hierarchy is going to look like in the future. So when their next wave of things has some 512 instructions, where do they go?
That's where. So you might remember from last release where we talked about this. So in AVX 10, you've got the AVX 10 v1, and it inherits from AVX 2, and AVX 512 is kind of parallel to that. And AVX 12 is basically never going to be versioned again. It's not going to be touched. We're not going to have new ISAs deriving from it. Instead, we have a nested class in AVX 10v1 named V512 for Vector 512, or 512-bit variant or version, or whatever you want to imply V is there. And that's where you've got that optional. You've got the baseline in 10v1, you've got the 512-bit extensions in a nested V512 class. And further down in here, there's a corresponding V512 nested class in 10v2 for the new instructions for 10v2.
It'll make sense when you scroll down, Jeremy.
Fair
For
enough.
certain definitions makes sense.
Yep. I got confused by that description because apparently source ... net, if you write avx10v1.v, it says there are no results, but then when you type the 5 after it, it's like, oh yeah, now I know what you're talking about. So Okay, so
Oh,
the
probably because dot single character it expects that to be a file name.
I guess, but dot two characters you'd think would be a file name as well. So the okay, so the 512s are still coming in the same waves. They just come in as an optional subset, like the
Right.
64 subset.
Right.
Okay. Are there any new
So we've got add and divide
verbs here?
for
Yeah.
round. So this next group, the convert, is kind of unique. There's two subsets here of verbs that exist, and they're joined with that and in the middle because it's one instruction doing two things. So this is doing a conversion of float to byte, and then widening it to a int 32 result. So you're still getting 4 inputs in, 4 inputs out. But it does that intermediate step of saying, I want it to saturate to 255 instead of saturating to int.max value. And so I went with the name of, it's long, it's verbose, but it's clearly the two operations we've already defined of widening and conversion. So convert to byte with saturation and then widen to int 32.
Makes sense to me.
And the rounding mode lets you pick how it converts to integer. So default would be ties to even. You can go and specify if you want a different mode, such as if you want it to round towards positive infinity instead. And then truncation is its conversion to byte via truncation is its own overload, which is the one after it, which is the truncation is how C# does conversions from float to integers by default. So that name, it's not my favorite, and it's a bit confusing, but it mostly follows the same convention here. If we're converting to byte using truncation, we're saturating to the width of the byte and then widening to int 32.
Okay.
If someone has a better suggestion for the ordering, I'm all ears, but
Is the word saturation
for
needed?
our existing,
Like,
well,
what would a
there's still the
non-saturating
saturation
truncate be?
there. So consider, for example, you have an input that is 127.5. The truncation means it's going to convert to an integer at 127. Then it's going to saturate and see, am I greater than the saturation boundary, which is byte 255? And if it is, it will saturate it down. So if you had like 260.5, it's going to go to 260, then saturate to 255, then widen up to.
Okay, so truncation's really you're describing your rounding mode.
Yes.
And I guess they don't support the full options of rounding modes, so we can't put it as a rounding mode parameter.
Right.
Could we put it as a rounding mode parameter?
Truncation's always been a little bit
And
special.
throw? Like, it's constant expression, it's constant expected. We could fail when you give a const that isn't supported. And then at the runtime when it can throw
Well,
if this mode isn't supported on this processor.
The issue is that the rounding modes correspond to an exact set of CPU bits today.
Okay.
And in some cases, the bits can be combined in interesting ways to represent other values that aren't that may be reserved. So there's not really space to put it in there.
Okay. Are these two convert to byte with saturation and widen to uint 32 that take a float rounding mode and don't? Are they the same instruction?
Yeah, they're the same instruction. It's just one doesn't have an embedded rounding mode. It uses whatever the current CPU value is, and the other
Okay.
one is an explicit rounding mode.
So, right, because I was
meaning it
asking
uses,
why we don't use
what the user tells it.
a default parameter, and it's because the default isn't expressible in a constant. It's as if a static somewhere controls the behavior of that overload. Okay.
Yeah, we would need to invent a sentinel value, which might confuse callers, I imagine.
No. So I mean, the fact that we can't express what the value is a good reason to not use a default. So.
Oh yeah, I mean it would basically be something like -1, which would be a sentinel for like, I don't know, CPU dependent. But yeah.
Right, but we can't use -1 because the bit value of 255 is potentially a valid rounding mode.
Yeah.
So how does it know if you specified the mode or not? Because if they're the same instruction.
The encoding, it's the same instruction, but the encoding is slightly different.
All right. I feel like we're talking about Unicode, and it's like, but it's the same character. Character doesn't mean what you think it does. Okay, moving on.
Conceptually, conceptually you can think of rounding mode as kind of like a nullable, where there's this bit that says respect the rounding mode versus don't respect the rounding mode, and then if the rounding mode, if the bit is set, then the rounding mode needs to be respected and it's read and used. Otherwise, it just reads it from the CPU default instead. And so there's this imaginary third bit that exists outside the normal 255 byte encoding.
Gotcha.
Control encoding. It's a little bit more complex, but that's basically how it is.
So when it's 0, it ends up with 8 don't care bits in the instruction encoding.
There's a compressed form, but yes, functional.
Fair enough.
And it kind of depends on the encoding if you're using EVEX versus VEX versus a legacy versus the legacy encoding.
This just reminds me a bit of when we were looking at the ARM instructions, the RISC instructions, how like each bit of the instruction specified like a rounding value or signedness or what have you.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, and they don't line up across the instructions either.
And my snarky comment of they obviously don't understand that R means reduced. So, and then they told me, I don't know what reduced means. All right. Yeah, so does anybody have a better name for this book here? I don't. So, just Tanner asked, confirming before we move on.
I think it's fine.
Hey.
There's an implicit Oxford comma in there.
Yep.
Yeah, maybe we could put like then so like in SSE2 we already have something like convert to int64 with truncation. So that's where that part of the name comes with. And so maybe we could do something like convert to byte with truncation, then saturate and widen to uint32.
I mean, grammatically, that makes more sense because right now what you have is verb, noun, noun, verb. But I don't care all that much.
Yeah, and people might confuse what the then means and whether the saturation applies to the byte or to the uint32. Like logically, it can only apply to the byte because if you've already truncated the byte, then it can't apply to widen to uint32. But it could confuse people depending on where it is. So tossed it out there as an idea. No strong preference.
The other.
It's going to be a little bit wonky no matter what.
The other change, maybe instead of a then, would be to change truncation to truncated. So truncated saturation instead of truncation saturation.
That reads well, I think.
Because now you're modifying the saturation behavior instead of the.
No, it's adjective noun, which is okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think I like that one. I'd be fine with it.
Grammar nerding for the win. Okay. Oh, I'm making those adjustments.
I mean, I have grammatical thoughts on the next cluster, but
This that looks
Yeah.
like NOP.
like I almost want the word of to be in there, but again, I don't know if this follows an established pattern.
Like you're converting a vector 128 of uint to a vector 128 of uint. That looks like NOP.
Right. So the way it basically works, that should potentially be named convert scalar, but we have this weird nuance of existing instruction names, which do take proper scalars. So basically, there's this set of instructions which are which do the same thing, but they move from a general purpose register into a vector. Whereas this instruction does the same thing, but it moves a scalar to a vector, and it zeroes the upper bits. So it's functionally taking the element 0 from value, moving it over to a new vector, and zeroing the rest of the elements. And supports it coming from memory without reading an entire vector's worth. It will only read the one element in the case that it comes from memory.
But we need to take vector instead of a scalar here because it needs to be on the right source register.
Right.
But couldn't we just know that we need to move it into the vector register as part of the op?
No, because all the tracking will be wrong. The tracking, the ABI, and everything else would be wrong if it was a scalar.
Because
So
nothing in the
maybe
name-
a better name would be convert scalar.
yeah, because nothing in the name here
vector
tells me it's actually
128
doing
and
anything.
32. Yeah. Convert scalar would be the modifier I would think we could add.
And why do you need the type names in it?
That matches
Because
to
yeah, because you potentially can have
You would allow a type
the-
coercing.
potentially, yeah, there's type coercing, and you can't overload based on return type. So our convention here is because other overloads could exist in the future, like for example taking int and converting to uint. You want to have the thing in there to specify what the return type is.
So the fact that they were only proposed as T source and T dest were the same was what made me ask the question. But if they don't have to be, then they don't have to be.
because I'm in my mind I'm inserting the word of before the return type, and I really want the method name to be that, but I'm also looking that we never did that for existing precedent, and this probably isn't the right place to start.
Yeah, I mean, if we've already used the name vector 128 uint 32, then
We have, yeah.
that's the name. So you want convert scalar to vector?
Yeah, I think that might help clear the ambiguity of uint to uint.
Doesn't scalar normally go at the very end in these names? Not
In
infix?
most cases, but we have inserted it before in other locations where it made more sense. Like add scalar makes sense with it being the suffix because you're doing the addition of the scalars. There's been combined instructions like with advanced SIMD where we've been like multiply scalar and add because you want to know that you're doing a multiplication of scalar values as the primary concept there.
Got it. So the infix would make sense here because you're converting a scalar
Yeah.
and producing something
Yeah.
else. Okay, got it.
So does that apply to all of these or just these two?
Just those two. The other ones are doing int to float conversions, and
Okay.
they aren't same type to same type. And they're working on like whole vectors and stuff.
Yeah. Well, there's a comment also saying that the new ones basically are overloads of existing APIs that just take a rounding factor, some type of control, right?
Right.
And then that seems like that would be pretty straightforward, right? They're just overloads of existing stuff.
Right.
I was just making sure that I couldn't hit find and replace all.
These conversion APIs in the second group, do they also have any type of saturation concerns, or is it just is that automatically done as part of rounding, or what?
Saturation. Saturation, allowing saturation after the conversion is a new concept, and that's what those instructions you saw higher up were. These
Okay.
ones are just the regular follow the specified routing mode without saturating.
Okay. Because I'm just thinking like a double to long conversion, like a double could overflow a long, right? Even if you round it.
Right. And so the historical behavior for Xarc is that they return a sentinel value on overflow.
Okay, got it.
The with saturation instructions are the new instructions that exist to follow the behavior that the industry is standardizing on, and that we took a behavioral change for x86 to be consistent with the WASM requirements and the what ARM64 does, which is you saturate instead of returning a sentinel,
Okay, got it.
which also most closely matches the general IEEE behavior recommended for operations, which is compute as if to infinite precision and unbounded range, then round to the nearest representable result, which would effectively be saturating for integers.
That makes sense. Yeah, got it. So that's why you don't have saturating overloads of all of these then. Got it.
Right.
Well, because we've already looked at a few earlier too. Okay.
Yeah, and then these are just overloads of existing functions. They take one additional parameter, which is the rounding mode, as float rounding mode.
And it always defaults to 2.0, it looks like.
It doesn't default. That's the
Oh, sorry.
maximum value
Oh, got it. But they all take the same type.
to help.
Okay.
Right.
Yes, you're right. There aren't default arguments here.
And then I assume these multiply and squirt and stuff they existed for other vector sizes, and this ISA is just the size that added this one.
Yep.
Because like vector multiply is a thing, so
Yeah.
And that's why you don't see a squirt 128 here.
Right, because we already have square root of 128.
Tanner didn't take the bait.
I just like Jeremy calling it squirt.
Yeah. All right. Is the
in this-
x64 distinction gonna make sense in the future for these, or are we adding it just because we're inheriting it from a lower ISA and need to intercept?
Right, we need the is supported to be intercepted. That way, someone doesn't do avx10v2.x64.is supported and get the answer for 10v1, and they think that avx10v2 is supported when it actually isn't.
Fair enough.
Good call.
And then here's the v512 class that exposes the few new instructions. So min max, convert to byte with saturation, etc. But taking vector 512.
And then a new thing, which you say isn't a new thing.
Which new thing that's not a new thing?
Multiple sum absolute differences.
Yeah, so the comment just above it, that's a 512-bit extension of the previously existing 128 and vector 256 one. So we already have multiple sum absolute differences for 128 and 256. This is just 10v2 adds it for 512 as well.
Fair enough.
Cool.
And then there's going to be a separate review in the future for at the very bottom of this proposal. Like it's in a spare comment. I pulled them out. There's because they don't have names that match the rest of them. That don't match our existing convention. So I need to go back with Intel and get them reviewed again. But we'll review those ones in a future proposal for the last little bit of 10v2.
Tanner, I had a quick question that I think you answered earlier, but I'm still not quite clear. For MinMax, the control that you take is typed as byte, but for a lot of the APIs that we looked at more recently, they have actual enums going in. That is intentional, right?
Right. So for the rounding mode in particular, we have an enum. For basically every other API, we just take a control byte because the bits aren't necessarily easily defined by a single enum. Oftentimes, it's more like a struct of bit fields,
Okay.
where each bit field set is itself in enum, and we don't want to get into the habit of exposing like 4 constant expected enum members that then the JIT internally has to combine together and deal with in weird ways. We just tell the user, provide the control byte that is the accurate bits,
Okay.
which may not have well-defined meaning.
So it's not that MinMax is special, it's that the rounding ones were special, and because they were special, they got a type.
Yes.
Okay, got it.
Right.
Cool, thanks for clarifying that.
All right, so I think we changed 2 things: the truncation saturation to truncated saturation, and the no-op looking converts. We inserted convert scalar to vector to say that it's doing something.
Yes.
It's up to a person to understand what that something means.
Oh, also, do you actually have an x64 class under the V512 stuff? You do. Okay, great. Just double checking that. Yeah, looks good.
Which finished us. Oh, I was gonna say exactly at time, but no, minute over.
You've been just in time for us to leave.
Exactly. Well,
Does that mean the backlog is now empty? Wow, it will be right after this.
I think one got added. Oh no, it didn't.
Nope, it just
It's
had to refresh the view after I marked it as approved. There's one that I have that I thought about marking ready for today, and if we finished an hour ago, I was gonna bring it early for discussion. But yeah, I mean, it's good that the backlog's running late because we're running out of time that we can hit quorum. So as everybody starts their various vacations.
Cool.
So I expect something will pop up before next week. I don't know if there will be any in December.
Yeah, you're right. Quorum's going to be a bit more difficult going forward.
Yep. And I hope we have at least one more, because I was planning a Happy New Year in multiple languages slide as we exit. But if we end up not having anything, then we don't. So, all right. Well, thanks everyone for joining us. And we'll see you probably next Tuesday, same .NET time on our same .NET channel. And if we don't see you Tuesday, then honestly it'll probably be January, but don't hold me to that. And with that, auf Wiedersehen.